With us, and we're joined now by the Freedom of Information campaigner Heather Brooke. There is something in this, isn't there? That people want transparent government and so on, but if everybody thinks that everything they do is somehow going to get out into public, it doesn't make government work very well.
That's actually not true, because that would mean that in countries where they've had a Freedom of Information Act for a long time, they would not have any records. And at least from my experience, having worked as a reporter in America, I found the records that I went through there much more extensive than what I see when I make Freedom of Information requests in Britain, where they don't feel that they ever have to account to the public. So they will pass incredibly expensive and hugely transformative policies, basically on the back of an envelope. You know, they won't have gone through a whole sort of argument that they want to show the public to say, this is the reasoning process we went through, this is all the cost analysis we did, here's why we made this decision, so that you will then accept it.
I can understand why for the people in government it might be an irritation to have to do Freedom of Information requests, but is it really a problem? Does it stop government working?
I don't think Gordon's, in this case Tony, because he calls himself an nincompoop, is saying get rid of the Freedom of Information Act. It's an important piece of legislation. It was in our manifesto. We've passed it. There were difficulties. There were arguments against it, but it's now part of the scene and people can ask. What Tony was actually highlighting, you know, if you sat in a cabinet committee or you've in fact had cabinet meetings or those sort of things, if you want to have a proper discussion, then frankly what's beginning to happen, you might have the discussion out in the alleyway instead of it going to the papers.
That's not true, because nobody has ever been able to get any cabinet minutes.
Yeah, well, I know, but you've been asking for them, so please, come on, that's one of the things you want. He's pointing out...
And you have a right to ask for them. There should be a public interest as to whether they're exposed.
Can I give an answer? I've been asked the question. And basically what I'm trying to say is that there are difficulties sometimes in making those discussions. Certainly when you get into cabinet committees, and people have been asking for them, it's a legitimate demand. Whether in fact you're prepared to concede it, you must take these other things into account. But on the other side of it, I was asked a question panel the other day, was who was attending my lunch at the inauguration in the House of Lords? Well, it was only my family, but I did think, why the hell should any press have an information about who had lunch for me?
Well, I'll tell you exactly why people would want to know things like that.
Why?
It's because there is a big problem with lobbying in Parliament, and people have a right to know if certain companies are taking ministers
this is my family. When the day I get inaugurated in the House, you can only have 8 people, and when you explain to them...
So what's the problem then?
Well, I don't see why they should be subjected to examination by the press. Do you?
I do actually, yes, because if you're inviting them as a public role, it's your investiture.
My personal role to invite them in this situation.
I think the point is,
why should they have their faces put up in the paper and an examination
take place? It's just a typical argument with a politician, isn't it? All talk, no listening.
But why should they?
Listen, I've just been listening to you. Don't give me all that rubbish.
But you asked her why they should. Why should they? Is it because it's public money? Is it because
these are people entrusted with a great deal of power, with a great deal of money, and they should be accountable to the citizens.
But in everything they do.
The only way that they can be that, I'm talking about in their public role, as far as they're spending public money and they're making decisions that affect the public, they should be accountable to the public.
I'm paying for it.
Christmas cards to Colonel Gaddafi, is it important that we know that?
Well, I mean, the point about this law is there's always a case-by-case basis, and the determining factor on every case is about the public interest. Is it in the public interest? So I can make an argument about why I should or why I would think it is or is not in the public interest, but that's something that every case is decided on. But to make this speculative argument that freedom of information is an idiotic law just because of some very made-up harm. This idea of cabinet minutes being just thrown out willy-nilly into the public, it doesn't happen.
Nobody has said it's an idiotic law. I started off, you don't listen, I started off saying it was a manifesto commitment. No political party done it before Labour. We brought it in. We have it in operation. And you're only sitting here because we did it.
The cabinet minister who so successfully tried to implement it was then sacked for his success.
Who's that?
The minister who was charged with it.
Charged with what?
With implementing the Freedom of Information law.
He wasn't sacked for that reason at all. What's the evidence for that? Perhaps you'll put a freedom of information question down and that's why he was sacked. You make these assumptions without a justification.
But just a final thought. One of the things which appears both there and in subsequent conversations is it's used for fishing expeditions. In other words, it's just a way of journalists getting stories, which is perfectly legitimate, but it's not actually serious.
I wish that was the case, because there is no more difficult way for any journalist to get a story than by using the Freedom of Information Act. That is the way you get actual facts, and I would tell you that getting facts out of the British government is almost impossible. Much easier to get rumour, to get innuendo and smears.
Mostly put about people like yourself
because
and indeed
there's no
the press.
facts. In the absence of facts, that's the kind of journalism
I'm
you get.
You should be asking the question. I'm even agreeable about the appeal. There is an appeal system, but it should be used much more effectively than it is
On
at the
that
moment.
agreeable note, we'll leave it there. Thank you both very much. Now, a special